so sorry. You're good.
My name is Jackson. Jackson Allen. I'm the VP for the Student Theology Club. And so today is Down Night with none other than obviously the awesome Dr. Joseph Davis. So what is our club about? Basically, we love coming together as believers, because I know not everyone here is a theology major. Actually, real quick, who here is not a theology major?
Oh, wow.
Wow. All right, very nice. Any comments? Or, hey! Okay. Yeah, so Theology Club is here for us who actually aren't really theology majors. Now, obviously, I'm a biblical studies major. Who else is here? Basically, we do this because we want everybody to come together and talk about the faith, challenge our beliefs, and kind of challenge our thinking. Because I think it's important. By the way, can everyone hear me? I kind of talk fast, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little bit nervous. So, but other than that, yeah, we really love to come together and really kind of talk, and also kind of just point out what we believe in. We believe in the truth, just as it says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Yeah, awesome. We also love to speak with humility. So just know tonight is a down night, so there are going to be some tough questions, and so we don't need to offend anyone. That is not the objective, but it can happen. So we just hope that you kind of offer some grace and humility, that this is kind of an open space where we can have different multiple questions. There's no question too big or too small tonight. And Dr. Davis is definitely going to introduce himself. I'm just kind of talking about the club, mainly what we do. Oh, quick announcements. Shaking for some reason. On April the 16th, we will be having our last meeting, sadly, on megachurches. Is the megachurch structure sound? Will it last? Or will it not? Actually, who has an opinion? Raise your hand if you have an opinion on megachurch. Oh. So definitely attend that meeting when we get to it. And also, do we have any other seats, by the way? If you have an extra seat, can you mind raising up your hand so we can fill some people? Yeah, sorry. Real quick, do you mind me to pray?
Yeah, go ahead.
Alright. I guess I'll leave. Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord God, we're just so thankful to be here today in your presence, Lord. And I just ask you to just fill us with your presence, Lord, and just allow this room to just be filled with people who have maybe doubts about even tonight. I ask Lord to be answered, so that we can not only, because Lord, I do believe we're all here for more of you, Lord, that we're hungry for you and your word. And sometimes, I'm sad to say, sometimes we can doubt. But when we doubt, let us focus on you, and let us ask questions that need to be asked, and give us what we need to answer them, Lord. Because, also, I pray that everyone's heart is open, and every mind is open, that we may be able to receive tonight. In Jesus' mighty name I pray. Amen. All right, that's about it. Dr. Davis, if you would like to take over now, that would be nice.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. It is great to be with everybody. I love being with you. And for those of you who don't know, I was a pastor for 19 years. And I left pastoral ministry because you were the future. And you guys are going to change the world. And if you don't, I'll come after you. No, I'm just kidding. So I actually do believe in you. And you're just much fun. Come on, just come on in. Just push your way in the name of Christ. Push people out of the way. Shove them, throw them on the ground. Yeah, yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I won't bite. You can come closer. Well, tonight is a doubt night, and I actually go around the country doing these, and this may seem like total insanity to sit in front of, in this case, not thousands of people, but thousands of people and say, ask the hardest question that you can think of. I usually come into Pat Benatar's Hit Me With Your Best Shot. That's how spiritual I am. So as a matter of fact, this weekend I'll be flying out tomorrow to go do this very thing in Kentucky. And talk out there. So I enjoy doing it. And people say, do you want the questions prepared beforehand? No, it's so much more fun for me to have to think on my feet and to hear questions maybe that I've never heard of before. Now, to be sure, I've heard a lot of questions. Nevertheless, it is a lot of fun to be able to just have interchange. And also, I do this for a reason, because I want to get across the message that, in fact, Christianity isn't hiding from the hardest questions out there. Now, this is where I want to begin tonight. I started taking philosophy classes at a secular university, and all of my Christian friends told me, you have got to stop that. You've got to drop those courses in that major. And I was like, why? And they said, well, because they ask really hard questions and you lose your faith. And I thought, how is it possible that I would lose my faith? I actually really believe this. It's like, what kind of question would be so hard that I would lose my faith? And by the way, if there's one out there, I'd like to hear it. I'd like to know why people would think that I would lose my faith from a question that they have. And so I've heard so many interesting questions, and some of them, a lot more interesting than others. But if there is something that a person has thought of, then it's interesting to them. And even my own father one time asked me, he said, how can it be that the thief on the cross is going to be with Jesus in paradise if he's going to be in the grave for 3 days? And so we began to talk about the humanity and divinity of Christ, and how while the humanity is localized, the divinity is not. And so that it would be true and possible for him to truly see Jesus in his divinity, even though he would not see him in his humanity. And my father went, darn, that was like a really good answer. You learned something. And I think he was shocked that I actually knew anything, and even more shocked that some of his money actually paid off for me going to college. So I have an undergraduate degree in philosophy and history, and philosophy is probably my stronger point. I have a master's degree in divinity and PhD in apologetics. And so what is apologetics? It's having an answer ready for those who ask for the hope that is within you, 1 Peter 3:19. And it doesn't mean that I know everything, certainly not. But an apologist is required to actually know a little bit about most things. And so that makes me probably really dangerous, because I do need to know a little bit about everything. And there's some things that I certainly know a little bit more than others. I love being with you, and I don't mind you asking hard questions. And I hope you do. And why? Because I actually believe this. I really believe it. And have I seen things that aren't intellectual that make me believe? Sure. I've seen miracles, creative miracles. As a matter of fact, Dr. Golden actually saw a creative miracle that I witnessed, where there was a young lady who had a hole in her foot without any bone. And somebody believed and said that there was going to be a filling of that bone. And she was instantaneously healed, so that bone appeared in her foot, and she had the x-rays to show it. Now, that's not a logical argument. And if you didn't see it, you probably wouldn't believe it. You're like, I don't believe that. I understand. That's sort of the nature of a miracle. But one of the fun things about our faith is our arguments aren't just all logical. Some of them are just caring for people. And some of them are just loving people. And there are times where we have hard answers to hard questions. But I want to encourage you to say it this way: make your whole life an argument for why we should believe in God. Because, in fact, there's lots of different ways in which people come to faith. So without further ado, that's the hardest question you can think of. And let's start. Ariel, go ahead. By the way, if I don't know your name, I apologize. Please correct me. Ariel.
So I have heard that some people, both Christians and not, mention scribal errors in the Bible. Do you
Yeah.
think that damages the inerrancy? Do you think they're there?
No, I don't. As a matter of fact, what I know is that in fact there are parts of the Old Testament in particular, since we're talking scribal and the writing, that aren't there. They're just not there. For example, there's parts of it that are missing. Do I believe that damages inerrancy? You could make the argument, well, why doesn't God just make it more plain? And I think one of the arguments that always comes up with God is, why doesn't God make it more plain what in fact, who he is? And I've heard people say, why doesn't God just show up and say, hey, I'm God? And to be sure, this earth has a distance between us and God. And so it is this idea that we're sort of thrown in this place where we have to make a decision, and people don't believe it's fair. Now, what is my response to that? It would not be fair were it not for the fact that, in fact, you have inside of you a reference to God, or to put it another way, inside of us, we have what's called general revelation. There is something inside of us saying that there is a God. How do I know this? First of all people want coherence. And in a chaotic world, coherence actually doesn't make sense. Let me put it another way. Everybody has a presuppositional belief in coherence. How do I know this? Number one, it's neurological. Your minds work this way. You actually have a center in your mind that is for the integration of facts. But more than that, I see your behavior. You're disappointed when things are left hanging. You don't like things that don't make sense. Even when we have things like murders and shootings, everybody asks one question, why? And see, this is the thing which I like about Friedrich Nietzsche, who is the atheist philosopher. I regard him as one of the few people who actually was honest about or understanding their atheism. He says, God is dead and we have killed him. Oh, the horror of it all. How shall we, the murderer of murderers, comprehend this event? And he says, I will tell you how. There is no right or wrong. He's correct. If, in fact, morality does not come from an unchanging source, by definition, morality will change. Let me say it again. If, in fact, I'm the beginner or arbiter, or I'm the one who decides morality that begins with me, most logically and necessarily end with me. And I would say that regardless of whether I'm a Christian or not, that is something that I think I can prove any day of the week, any time. And as a matter of fact, I will pay you money if you can defeat me in that thought. I will absolutely pay you. There's no possibility logically. Now, I would tell you there's a lot of really bright people like Nietzsche who figured that out. God is dead, therefore there's no right or wrong. Now, what's interesting is C.S. Lewis says this, yet we find that people want it. In other words, all human beings have morality. Please feel free to challenge me on that. Even sociopaths, because I work in a psychiatric hospital, I'll tell you that sociopaths don't care about you, but they do care about justice for themselves. And that indicates that, in fact, they understand morality. Whether they apply it or not is a different thing, or whether they want to apply it or not is a different thing. But the understanding of justice as it relates to themselves is a clear indicator that they do understand what we call moral reasoning, because they use it whenever it benefits them. And so you have something in you that desires morality. And it isn't merely a quid pro quo. It isn't merely something where you can exchange. For example, Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins says this, that morality is based upon a social contract. I'm going to say that I admire Richard Dawkins in the area of biology. He's horrible as a philosopher, and most atheistic philosophers agree. He's just bad at it. And why? The social contract theory is one of the worst ideas in ethics. Number one, anything that is voluntarily entered into can be voluntarily voided. And so the idea that one can have a social contract that benefits me really works best if it only benefits me and not you, or to put it another way, that the social contract really reduces to egoism. And so the idea of morality is something that all human beings have, even sociopaths, and comprehension of, shall we say, the universe itself. There is something in us that wants to understand why. In a chaotic universe, you could say it's merely pragmatic, that in fact people want to know so they can figure things out. I don't think so. I think people actually want to know the deep stuff, the really, really deep stuff. As a matter of fact, funny story along these lines. I've heard also many people tell me, Dr. Hayes, people aren't interested in apologetics today. Really? Look around. say, you know, these kids, they're not into religion, Dr. Davis, so talk 15 minutes and we'll be done. I was there for 3 hours. And finally I had to say, listen, I gotta go. It's an hour ride home and I'm tired. I can't stay here all night. And they said, will you come back? People do have questions as to why. And Nietzsche says this, God is dead and we have killed him, oh the horror of it all. Therefore, there's no right or wrong. There's no up or down. And I want you to hear the last part. And the question why loses all meaning. And even for people who don't believe in God, they do not live that way. And perhaps the best book that you can read if you want to be an atheist is The Stranger by Albert Camus, where he says, I killed a man today. The sun was in my eyes. And everybody keeps going, but why did you kill him? You're missing the point. If there isn't a reason for anything, why would there be a reason for this? And so when we hear of a mass shooting, what we all want to know is, why? Why is it that you want to know why? Why are you obsessed with why? Why do you keep asking why in a universe that is devoid of meaning? If the universe is an accidental occurrence devoid of meaning, and you're a part of the universe by definition, you are devoid of meaning also. And yet, everybody wants it. Everybody wants to give meaning to their life. But you see, that's a psychological crutch based upon a delusional need. Because if there isn't any meaning in the universe, why do you want to give it? If in fact there isn't any, why is it that you have this incessant need to create meaning? Well, I give meaning to my life, really. It's quite an act. Considering there isn't any, how do you do that? And so why am I a Christian? Because a little group of runaway slaves came up with the most amazing idea in all the world, that there was a God that preceded time, space, and matter. And there was only one of them. This God said, let there be light. So all the way back to the question. Wow. It's having that kind of effect. I absolutely believe that the only possibility for coherence is to presuppose absolute coherence, which means that in fact that you're presupposing a coherence above yourself. And so to presuppose absolute coherence means that it's not you. And yet every time you ask the question, I think that you're looking for it. I hope you find it. Next question?
Before we continue, if you have a question and you want to ask anonymously for whatever reason, we have a question box on our Instagram. It's @BioClubSEU. We'll interject whenever that happens, but you
Let's do it this way. We'll take one from the floor and one from the text.
That sounds great.
Now, will we get to all your questions? No. Yes, sir. All the way in the back.
Do you think the case for theistic evolution is strong?
Yeah, I don't like the idea that everything just falls into place. I think that in order to have evolution, you're going to have a guiding force. There are some parts of evolution. If I'm going to choose evolution, I'm going with punctuated equilibrium and not Darwinian evolution. And punctuated equilibrium also leaves room for creation. And so the founder of this idea from Harvard, Jay Gould, always would go toe-to-toe with Richard Dawkins. I find his case far more compelling. I do not find the case for gradualistic evolution compelling for numerous reasons. Number one, what Darwin himself said in Origin of the Species. And what did Darwin say? He said, if my theory is true, we will find thousands of transitory stages before you get to one that works. That's correct. That makes perfect sense. In other words, if in fact it's a blind universe that's occurring, then if we shouldn't expect that we're going to get something that works right away. The best example that I give is I am horrible at mechanical things. As a matter of fact, so bad that my children would ask this question, how much will it cost when Dad gets done? They're so sweet. Anyway, I know that I don't have that ability, even with some limited intelligence. I'm not good at this. And so what would it look like if I tried to build a house? You wouldn't want to live in it. Well, that's my point. In order for us to have transitory stages, you need thousands of them before you get to one that works. We do not see that in the fossil record. Example, Bighorn Basin, there's 5 million years of information, and there are no transitory stages. over 5 million years in a tar pit. If in fact there's no transitory stages over 5 million years, I found it inconceivable in the most liberal estimates of time that we could have just simply happened. By the way, the co-founders of the DNA do not believe it either. You might be surprised, not you, but you might be surprised to learn that Francis Crick, who does not believe in God, says it is not possible for the complexity of the DNA to have simply evolved. So having said that, people ask him, so do you believe in God? And he said, no, I'm an atheist. Well, wait a minute. You just said that the DNA could not have formed over the most liberal estimates of the Earth's universe. So where did it come from? And he said, well, isn't it obvious? It's an extraterrestrial. By the way, by definition, God would be an extraterrestrial. Extra means outside of, terrestrial, this world. And so it's just a question of which. Next question.
One question I struggle with is, how does a lifetime of sinning, so like 70 or 80 years, deserve an eternity of suffering and hell?
How does, okay, so how does 70 or 80 years?
Of sinning deserve an eternity of suffering?
Yeah, it would only deserve an eternity if in fact it was at the core of your being. It was not merely an action, but a display of who you are. In other words, if you're saying, does any action that we do in finite time equate with infinite time? Well, it certainly could if it's an infinite object to which it is directed. But I think the real answer isn't an action, but who we are. And so the question isn't what you do, but who you are.
So, to believe, to have salvation, you must believe in the Son of God, which is Jesus.
I've heard that.
I was gonna say, like, what happened for the people that never even heard of Christ,
Yeah.
and they died not knowing Christ?
Yeah, and so I'm going to tell you there's two options here and two scriptures that I'm going to give you. The first one is that in Acts it says that God places people according to his own design. And truthfully, that makes a lot of sense because it's hard to believe that variables exist outside the comprehension of God. Okay? So it does make sense. In other words, if time and space would make a difference, God would grant it. In other words, it isn't as simple as, gosh, I never had a chance. It's more the idea of, since God knows perfectly, it would make no difference. Now, that's sort of a hard pill to swallow, okay? Because we don't have the mind of God. And since we don't have the mind of God, we don't know if that's true. Is it logically possible? Absolutely. If God knows perfectly, then in fact, your placement or your geography is immaterial. Let me say it again, just so you hear it. If in fact God knows perfectly, then where you are born would be immaterial as to the result. In other words, we'd be arguing about your nature as opposed to your environment. And if in fact your nature is going to turn out the same regardless of where you are, then the bottom line is it doesn't matter where you are. Now, option number two, just in case you don't like that one. Option number two is Jesus preaches in 1 Peter 3:19 to the souls in prison. What does that mean? I don't know. But it means that some people got a second chance. And could it be possible that other people get a second chance? I don't know. But here's what I think. What I know is not everybody heard it. Not everybody was preached to. And so I think it is definitely true that some people are not going to have a second chance because God knows it won't make a difference. And you say, how would God know that? Well, by the way, we are talking about God. And secondly, not only are we talking about God, I'm going to talk about pervasive omnipresence. Meaning that in fact, that since there is no space that God would inhabit, that God inhabits actually the synaptic connections in your brain. And so that he feels everything that you feel and knows everything that you know. And so his comprehensive knowledge is that, how shall we say, he's not going to be wrong. And so if in fact he feels and knows everything you feel, there isn't the slightest possibility that he'll be wrong about you. Because he has a comprehensive knowledge of you, which no one has, including perhaps even ourselves. So do I think that it's perfectly logical? I do. I think it's perfectly logical. Whether we like it or not is another question. But will we get a second chance? If there's a second chance, what I know is, from that scripture, 1 Peter 3:19, not everybody is preached to. Why am I saying this? Because in order for it to be true that Jesus is the way, truth, life, and no man comes to the Father except through him, then in fact, he would have to be the only door. Now, I'm going to say logically, that's the only possibility. You got two options here. Either Jesus is worthless, or in fact, he's who he says he is, and he is the only door. Why? If in fact you have a plan A and a plan B, as soon as you tell me there's a plan B, you've already told me something about plan A. Namely, it's unnecessary. Let me say it again so you hear it. If in fact you have a plan B and a plan A, you don't need a plan A if you got a plan B. So if you tell me, in fact, there's another way to heaven, bottom line is Jesus is immaterial and unnecessary. And so that's a little bit of a problem because all other religions try to reach up to God and say, become a good person. Christianity says that's sheer hogwash. The only possibility for you to reach God is that God comes to you. How could you ever think that a finite could reach an infinite? How could you ever think that something impure could reach perfect purity? How could you ever think that someone who's limited in knowledge would be able to talk to somebody who is perfect in knowledge? And so I think really the only possibility for God to have any communion at all with us is the idea that Christianity presents with bells on, particularly in the image of Christ, that he comes down, he jumps down to be with you. Now the only question that I find illogical in all of this is why he would care. That one's a strange one. Some people say, well, because he needs us. It's not possible, because he couldn't exist if in fact you weren't around if he needed you. And so I find it interesting that God wants to be with us. By the way, Aristotle couldn't conceive it either. In his God, God only thought of himself all the day long because nothing else was worthy of his thought. The Hebrew God likes you for some reason, and he wants to be with you. The only thing I can come up with is because you're created in his image, and he wants to share himself with you. Not because he needs you, but just because of an abundance of himself. Next question.
Dr. Hughes?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sorry.
To keep in line with eternal judgment or eternal fate,
Yeah.
someone asks something to the effect of, how is it just for God to allow people to go to hell?
Yeah. How would it be just for God to allow people to go to hell? Okay, so basically, just reiterate the answer. If in fact it would not make any difference, it won't make a difference. In other words, if in fact your nature is that you don't want to be with God, God will grant you that. And frankly, I think that is the nature of many people. I don't think that I'll use myself as an example. Before I came to Christ, I'll be as blunt and as honest as I can, I didn't want anybody telling me what to do, including God. It's that simple. I want to be the one who decides what happens to me. I want God to respect my wishes, and I don't want God telling me anything, curtailing my fun, or curtailing any of the things that I want to do. I merely want God to step aside and let me do what I want. And basically, God has this idea like, I don't know, that he's God or something. And he sort of feels like we're his creation. Now, let's go deeper. The freest person is the person, oddly or strangely or ironically enough, the person who's most attached to God and dependent, quite literally, upon God. Why? If God is the source of life, if God is in whom we live and breathe and have our being, then in fact, to be contrary to God would be contrary to our source of life. And basically, there's just a point where God says, you can have what you want. If you don't want me, you may have that. Now, you say, well, I don't want hell. I understand that. But what you want is the absence of life, the absence of the source of life. And you say, no, I don't. You want life on your terms. Unfortunately, it was never yours to begin with. That's God's air you're breathing. Please give it back.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what would you argue for those that, in light of the Nashville shooting, would argue that how can an all-knowing, all-powerful God let such a tragedy happen? Like, what good could possibly come from that?
Oh, okay, well, the last part's an easy one, okay? And so, okay, all right, let's, gosh, there's so many ways to answer this. Anybody have $1 you want to trade for my 5? First one to give me $1, give me 5. Oh, you gotta come up. All right. Oh, well. Oh, well. Here we go.
Just say. Just put it out there. I got 20.
You wanna take one? Pass it back. You keep it a minute. You're going to Israel, you're saving up your money. Now, what you may not realize is you've made one of the most sophisticated arguments for suffering that there is, without question. And it's real simple to a certain degree. How many of you, if I had $1,000 bill, would want to trade your dollar for my 1,000? Okay. Those of you who are not raising your hand are very, very bad at mathematics. Now you may say, well, I don't really believe that it's a legitimate. Let's just say that for sure it's legitimate. I have a banker standing next to me, counting it out from, I don't know, whatever bank, and they got the money and they're holding it. It's legit, let's say. Why wouldn't you make that trade? Well, I bet you would. Here's my point. Anytime you can get more for less, it's a good deal. So here we go. In order, this is something new I thought of this year. E is eternity. It's not really the symbol, but it's easier for all of us. F is for finite. Finite squared does not equal eternity. God will always trade a finite for an infinite, either directly or through extension. Because nothing that is finite will ever equal an infinite. And all God has to show is that in fact an infinite is possible, or probable. If in fact it's possible, it beats us every day of the week. And you would make the trade too, because you just did. And you just would. So if you ask me, will God trade a finite for an infinite? Sure. Second point, all the kids who died, I believe, are going to heaven. I don't know about you, but I believe they're going to heaven. Was it horrible the way they died? Absolutely, it was horrible. Was it just you know, how shall we say, something that we hope would never occur? Absolutely. Second point, the Bible never says that this is a perfect place. What it says is this earth is in process, and anything in process is imperfect by definition. And so very simply, if you're looking for perfection, I can't help you. Because the scriptures never, ever say that this is it. And why? I had a lady ask me why her 15-year-old son died. And she said, I bet you can't answer it. And I said, I can't answer particularly why your son and not another, but I certainly can answer why 15-year-olds die, or why young people die, or why anybody dies. Because the ultimate lesson of suffering is for God to shout from the top of his lungs, this is not it. So God allows for suffering and evil to occur in this world so that you will understand that anything that is transitory and passing is not the final destination or the final hope or even anything that God wants to attach meaning to. So very simply, Christians believe that this is a temporary stage and that this is forever. And they're betting the world on it, so to speak. They did not love their lives even unto death. And so logically, if there is an eternity, no matter how many numbers you put behind this finite, it will never equal an eternal. And so if God can realize an infinite from a finite, he'll make that trade every day of the week. I might say, well, but what about these children? I agree. Which is why I think that their pay is better. Well, but it's horrible the way they died. Yes, I agree. I'm not so sure that death is that great anyway. Remember, pretty sure that people die every single day. I'm pretty sure that God is actually a part of that. You may not like to think about God like that. But I'm going to say it has to be that way, that God is actually active in the death of every single person who dies. Why? Because he's the giver of life. So when he takes life, it would not be immoral for God to do so, number one, because you can't even have morality, but number two, on a more practical sense, because very simply, what makes killing wrong is the assertion of a gift that God creates. So the artist may do whatever the artist wants with his or her own artwork. I'm pretty sure there aren't any artists in the world who disagree with me. What you may or may not know is all the great artists probably painted over other paintings to get their classic works. So if you were to say to Leonardo da Vinci, you cannot paint over that canvas, I'm going to bet you Leonardo would say, watch. So do I think it's mathematical? I do. I think God's really good at math. And every time he can make that trade, he will absolutely do it. And so would you, if you understood what in fact we were talking about. In fact, you'll do it even for $5. Thoughts, questions? Yes, sir.
I have like.
Oh, wait, have we got?
Yes, we have.
We're on track? Okay, good.
Okay, so I have like a question and then questions behind the question.
A question behind it.
Yeah. So I have the bigger question, like open theism.
Oh, okay.
And then I have questions on like, so first, scripture. Like I've seen a lot of scripture, it's like one God changes his mind.
Yeah,
One
okay.
God regrets things
Sure.
and he's taking back decisions he's made.
Yeah.
Or says he does.
Okay.
Also like free will seems to come.
Wow,
in.
you got lots of things going on.
Yeah, and then, okay, and isn't it kind of like, I don't know, this is just a thought, but if God already knew everything was gonna happen, isn't it kind of evil to create something that you knew was gonna be like awful? Like we've had world wars and like children like getting raped and like murders and all these awful things. Isn't it kind of wild to like create this when you could have just created imperfection if you knew this was gonna happen? Like, if he knew everything from the beginning, didn't he know Adam was gonna
Yes,
be
that's
from
correct,
misery?
yes.
So is it even free will? And also, what's the purpose of prayer if he already knows
Yeah,
everything?
okay. Yeah, you've got like 10 questions.
Happens for a while.
All right, so we'll start with prayer. If in fact I inform God of something he doesn't know, I'll never pray to God again. Why? He's too stupid. And you're like, well, you're helping it. Really? Really? Seriously? I mean, because you've got a lot of experience in this life, right? I mean, you've got a whole, 30 years? So if I can inform God of something and my knowledge tops God at any point, why would I ask for his opinion on anything? Why not just consult myself? So I'm not really thinking that I'm helping God out. Now, second point, maybe you move God through your prayers. So would that mean that in fact God was not perfect in his motivation or emotions? And that I'm superior to God in my motivation or my feelings? In other words, like when Moses prays to God and he says, don't destroy this people, Israel, God relents because Moses' prayer was so effective that it changed God's heart, because God's heart was so vicious and evil that he really wanted to destroy them. Even though he'd made this promise, like to Abraham years ago, that he was going to bring them back and that all the nations of the earth would be blessed through them. Or maybe God's a very good psychologist. Maybe God saying to Moses, go ahead and pray, knowing all along what's going to happen. Do we think that God knew it? He prophesied it. He gives Abraham a dream that they're going to be in slavery, and then he says, I'm going to bring them back. In fact, he tells him, and I want you to think this through. He tells Abraham, after Abraham says, hey, I don't have any kids. He says, look at the stars in the sky. That's how many of your descendants will be. And all of them are going to come through you. So if he wipes out all of his progeny, does that promise come true that he ought? I think it does. By the way, that also wipes out Jesus. because he's from the line of David, which is the seed of Abraham. And so do I really think he's rolling the dice with Jesus coming to earth, since the Bible said he was slain before the foundation of the world? No. I think this is a good example of what we call anthropomorphism, where God comes down to our level so that we can commune with him, but not once was he giving up his plan. And how do I know this? Because in Genesis 15, he walks through the calf that is split in the breaking of the covenant. And in doing so, he says to Abraham, this promise that I make for your progeny, your children, will have nothing to do with you. I'll be the one who walks through the calf, and the curse will come upon me. So in that beautiful moment, we have the prophecy of all the people of faith coming through Abraham, and of Jesus taking the curse upon himself. So do I think that God had amnesia when Moses prays, and God goes, oh, that's a really good idea, I should do that? No. I think he's a patient, loving father who wants to involve his children. But the purpose of our prayers is not to tell God something he doesn't know or to dissuade him on some evil intention, but rather to incorporate us into a relationship with him. Or as Søren Kierkegaard says, it is not God who needs to be changed in prayer. Rather, it is us. Now, that was just one of the many. So give me one or two more so we can give other people a chance.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, yeah, isn't it kind of evil to know all this is gonna happen and then continue to make it happen?
Yeah. It would be evil if there wasn't a greater good, to be sure, or to put it another way. Would it be evil if in fact there's some benefit later on? Paul says this, your suffering trains you for a weight of glory. And so if there's no payoff, then for sure I agree wholeheartedly. Or let me put it another way. I shocked my fiance, who later became my wife, because I said this, if there isn't a God, I'd sell drugs to children. Now you'd like to date a guy like that. You're like, oh my golly, I don't want to ever date somebody like that. And she was shocked. She was going, what kind of person are you? And I said, a person who believes in God. And she goes, I know, but I could never sell drugs to children. And I said, that's you. But if you're asking me, do I believe in morality without God? No, I think it's a stupid idea. Because morality has to come from an unchanging source. So, when it relates to everything that occurs in this earth, why would it be cruel of God to allow this to occur, or to do it? Not just allow, to do it. If there wasn't a payoff later, absolutely, absolutely, no question. But that's sort of the point. The scriptures don't teach that. The scriptures teach that all of your suffering actually trains you for this. Now, if that isn't true, you're 100% right. But of course, who would care anyway? Okay. Oh, text.
Yeah.
What time do we have? I know that I'll go.
It is 7:45.
By the way, time is a relative concept.
Can you touch on predestination? We have a few on that.
I choose not to.
All that.
Thank you. Did you know that was coming?
Predestined.
Did you know that? Yeah. You're free to the degree that God grants it. Here's why. If in fact you're more free than God grants it, that means you're more powerful than God. Okay? You're free to the degree that God grants it. Which means that God has veto power. It doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to choose. It just means that God has veto power. Number one, he says choose. So for God to say choose means that in fact that you have choices. Now, are you so free that God can't do anything about it? No. And I'm going to tell you why you should believe that way. Russia has nuclear weapons. I don't want to base this world's existence on whether Putin wants to put a nuclear bomb in Florida. I want to believe that God has the ability to have veto power. Let me give you an example. My children, when they were small, had freedom. Did they have absolute freedom? Absolutely not. I mean, like your parents said to you, you do whatever you want. You just, if you want to go play on the road, go ahead. It's all good. I'm pretty sure if they loved you, their were restraints to your freedom. Why? Because you could get run over. That's why. And so it would not make sense to me that earthly parents would be more wise than God. If in fact your earthly parents limited your freedom so you didn't get hurt, I'm going to tell you God's going to do the same thing for sure. And so it doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to choose, but you're free to the degree that God grants it. Number two, because in fact you create a variable that God can't figure out. You say, well, you can figure it out. Well, what I mean by that is, if everybody chooses 100 decisions a day, then each of your 100 decisions creates variables that are at least in the 100,000s. You're like, how? It's simple. It's just called exponential math. That in fact, each decision creates another decision which keeps on going and going and going and going. And so I would think that it'd be very, very improbable, impossible, that in fact that God could grant you the freedom to mess up everything. How sure am I of this? I'm so sure that when Jesus is prophesied to be born in Bethlehem in Micah 5:2, that God has to factor in even the steps of the donkey getting there, carrying a pregnant woman that could go into labor at any moment. One false step has Mary giving birth to Jesus outside of Bethlehem. It doesn't mean the donkey isn't stepping, but it does mean that it's factored into the equation. Or to put it another way, God is your safety net. He has the ability to veto bad decisions. He's not vetoing them all, by the way. But he is vetoing the ones that are catastrophic. Let me give an example. I'm a hopeless romantic. And I prayed 5 times, oh God, let me marry this beautiful woman. And first time God said no. Second time, no. Third time, no. Actually, I should tell you how this all went. The first time, she wouldn't pick up the phone when I called her. So I took that as a sign. It's true. It's so sad, but it's true. Okay, the second time, I said, God, that prayer I prayed, could you subtract that? I have new information. I don't think that was a good prayer. So let's just not do that one. The third one, she said, I'm calling the police if you keep... No, she didn't say that. I don't even remember what the third one was, to tell you the truth. The fourth one, we each found someone else. The fifth time I prayed, oh God, let me marry this person. I think God said, that's an awesome idea. No. Great idea. One final illustration about this. So when we moved to Florida, my kids had a tough time. Those of you who moved, especially if you were a kid, you understand. They cry themselves to sleep at night. As a parent, sad. It bothered me. So my youngest daughter was the one who took it the hardest. Why? Very first day in school here in Lakeland, a snake comes into her room. And they all have to get on their desks because the snake's crawling around in the classroom. She comes home crying, and she's like, is this what every day in Florida is going to be like? The snakes are going to be on the floor. And we're like, well, no. I know, but there was a snake right there. I know, it probably won't ever happen again. She cried herself to sleep at night. So when her birthday came around, I said to my wife, what can we do for my daughter? Let her know how much we love her. And she said, well, you know the one thing she'd want to do. I go, what? No, what is it? She wants to go to Disney. No, it's way too expensive. We're not doing that. I'm joking. I said, okay, tell all the kids not to go to school. And in fact, we'll take her to Disney. So my daughter gets up and she puts on her school uniform. I go, Rachel, today you don't have to wear your uniform. You can dress up however you want. She goes, I don't think so, I'll get in trouble. I go, no, I'll take it on this one. You tell them to talk to me. And so we get in the car, all of the kids, and as we're driving along, I said, Rachel, you do anything you want. What would it be? This is your birthday, what would you like? And she said, I'd like to go to Disney. I said, is that what you'd like? And she said, yes. And I said, very well. Today, we will go to Disney. And all the kids are up. Who chose? What time is it?
It is 7:52.
We got time for floor now, next to floor?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, we just have time for one more, go ahead. Sorry for everybody else, sorry.
Okay, before I start this question, I'd like to state.
Is this like 7 questions?
It's one question.
Okay, all right.
Okay, this should be a quick one. But before I say this question, I'd like to state that the main pastor of this campus is guilty of the question I'm about to ask. So, should a pastor be held accountable for spending thousands of dollars on luxury clothing, including brands that despise Christians, and still preach of prosperity?
Oh, okay. So should
Should a pastor be held accountable for spending
for
thousands?
preaching on prosperity, spending thousands of
No,
dollars?
should he be held accountable for spending thousands of dollars on clothing?
Okay,
And some of that
now just to be
clothing-
clear, you're not talking about me. No. Because, you know. Go ahead.
Everybody in the back is good. I got community.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, I'm probably not gonna hold someone accountable for, I'd have to ascertain that they actually know that that's the case. For example, I know things about companies that other people don't. For example, did you know that Nestle, everybody who likes chocolate, sold out-of-date baby formula to people in Africa because they knew they couldn't get away with it in the United States?
100%.
I have a problem with that, okay? Would I have a problem with supporting someone who's persecuting Christians? Yes, I do have a problem with it. Do I think we ought not to do that? Yes, I think we ought not to do that.
But there's a quick thing, I'm just gonna mention one brand that I did see on this pastor, he was wearing Travis Scott ones, and he spent around $800 on that pair of shoes. And Travis Scott is known as a man that does not like Christians, and he more supports the devil than anything. But the pastor, if he's all that wise and being able to be a pastor, shouldn't he be wise enough to know what he's spending money on?
So where did I need to bring
Just
up
to be honest and
that?
transparent, I don't think I know that much. Okay, just to be honest and transparent. I could be guilty of the same thing without knowing. Okay? So the question comes in, is that knowledge that the person has? If the person has the knowledge, then I think they ought not to do it. But if you ask me, do I have knowledge of all the companies that make all the stuff that I own or wear or stuff like that? I don't. To the degree that I have, I try to be ethical, and I'll put it this way. And I think everybody should be. I'll close with this. The only thing that evil needs to succeed is a good men and women. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to go into communion, and I would love to sit around, love nothing more than sit around and answer questions and talk. But this is why we have something called the Theology Club. Yeah. And let me encourage you to be a part of it and come and talk. And this is what they do. They talk about some of the hardest questions. And not everybody's going to agree. Okay, that's all right. That's okay. We're adults. We can handle it. And yet we can have lots of really, really awesome exchanges of information and opinions. So since we know that truth can divide, let's do something that brings us all together. And on the night that Jesus was betrayed.
It's gonna take just one.
Oh, never mind.
Yeah. The body of Christ is still making its way around. All right, we're gonna make this real efficient, people. Yeah. Wait, is anyone actually gluten-free? Like, they have no way, really? Oh my god.
If you're just intolerant. Just tolerate it.
Wait, what's your substitute for the bread?
It's just a little non-gluten wafer.
Oh, can I have that,
Yeah.
please? Thank you.
Actually, ask me afterwards.
All right,
We should.
yeah.
We respect everybody.
Took a big chunk. Oh, no, it's called chunks. And my dad's like, I'm so proud of you for doing that. You know? He's like, everybody takes a chunk. And I'm like, no, give me a
I also need the
Yeah, like I was talking to this person.
question to the, like, you're probably asking this question, Nicholas Cage.
Thank you.
By half hour. Half hour. Your phone. Like, tell me I'm wrong. Back in the day.
Like an alternate dimension.
Especially when you get to that. When you start getting mad.
You Sarah like those shorts?
Yeah, when you get to those pants.
Those not like some shorts.
It was like
I got rid of those. I used to have it.
Look at that. Like an older like national treasure. There's no national treasure. There is, but it's not.
I get a double.
I mean, I don't think this was
there's a new series, but it's a big thing.
Well, then I'm not watching. So it's not national treasure. It's like Indiana Jones without what's his name.
Did you enjoy the answer?
Yeah, I don't think that's Nicholas Cage.
That's him for a movie.
Have you heard of what was the other revolution you said? Yeah, because there's Darwinian and what was the other one? It's the one where I never heard of it. It's the one where it's like the Harvard professor. Yeah, it's like humans. Yeah, it was very
I saw the ad
What a
for
great
that.
opportunity
Yes.
we have to express our love and joy for each other and for Christ in partaking in communion. Before we do, I want to end with this story. Sometimes I like to tell stories. And I actually told this one in my Christian thought class just tonight. There was a lady who invited me over to her home for dinner. She was 85, and she cooked an incredible dinner. And she said, Pastor, I have written something in my will, and I've asked you here tonight so that when this occurs, that you'll be there to make sure my wishes are taken or accounted for. And I said, okay, well, what is it? She said, I have DNR, do not resuscitate, in my will. And I thought maybe she's depressed. And I said, Anne, are you depressed? And she said, no, I'm not depressed. And then she looked at me, she sort of smirked. And then she patted me on the hand, and she said, I know something that you don't. And I thought, that's a lie, that's not true. I'm joking. It's a joke. It's a joke. It's a joke. And she said, see, I've already died. When I was 34, I died on the operating table. And my spirit left my body, and I saw it. And I was ushered into the presence of Jesus. And she said, when I was there was nothing like it in all the world. There's no feelings to describe it, and so I want you to make sure that when I die, that no one brings me back. And I said, so just so we're clear, you want me to make sure you're good and dead. She said, exactly. And I said, okay. I said, do you mind me asking what happened? She said, when I saw Jesus, I said, please let me go back. I have 2 small children, and their father is left. Let me go back and raise them. And she said, they're all raised, and they have their own kids. And talk about God. And she goes, and you do a good job. You've never seen him. On the night that Jesus was betrayed, he took some bread and he said, this is my body, broken for you. And so the communion looks back to the cross and the sacrifice that Christ made. And then he took the cup and he said, this is the cup of the new covenant, the new agreement, my blood, which is poured out for you. As often as you eat this bread or drink this wine, grape juice, remember me. And so communion is a time where we think about our lives and do introspection, fearless moral inventory, where we say, dear God, am I living the way I ought to live? And communion is also the time where we proclaim Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. So as you eat this bread, take a few moments of prayer and examine your heart. And then when you're ready, eat the bread and then drink the cup. And when you do, you proclaim that you, like my friend Anne, will see him again. Let's pray. Amazing grace. Sing with me. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Do this in remembrance of me, Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. Thanks so much for coming out.
You better come with this participant.
It's okay. There's nothing wrong with one
Well, I will find you. Don't forget Labor on your roll. Don't forget to sing with me.
I'm sorry. It's my fault for getting up early.
I love grape juice.
I never drink. It's sexy.